But then, the worst thing happened to you that could happen to any fighter. You got civilized.
It's June 2025. Now, over the many years, I've talked about and mentioned the cycles of civilization and the patterns within. And I've said we are in the late stage, or the last stage of civilization, the age of decadence, again. And we repeat history because history is forgotten, either by chance or design. And what always follows is our demise. And I further expanded on this by saying, hard times create strong people create good times, and good times create weak people, and weak people create hard times. But let's break this down even further to find out what happened, what happens that each time we reach this point, the age of decadence, and everything falls apart in civilizations. And you can see this throughout history, or at least what history has told us, what is told history is. Now, what we see, for example, looking at hard times create strong people. These strong people is not the majority. What we see is the rise of the alpha males and even the alpha females, the ones who are strong, who can endure, who can rebuild, who can build, and who can overcome, adapt, and move forward, who have greater critical thinking skills, a greater knowledge base, and who have greater ability to separate the emotions when making conclusions or decisions. And the alpha types, you would think, be running the world today, but something happens. So we see in this first part how strong people are very important, very needed. Now, after that, strong people create good times, meaning that the hardship and the, as a descriptive, suffering and everything else is no longer. We create an abundance of everything, whether it be food, resources, anything. And we see an expansion of everything needed for society to exist as well as coexist together and be strong. Now, from this, we see, for example, how good times create weak people. Now, this is where things take a turn, because the very people, the very strong people, for example, the alpha types, you would think would continue to dominate, for example, rule because of their greater abilities overall, not just in mind, but physical strength, would continue to have control. But now we have a problem where the beta types, for example, the beta men and the beta women, want equality. Now, before this happens, the women, the alpha women and the beta women, cannot compete against the alpha men, whether it be physically or mentally, perhaps even emotionally. And they see them as a threat, and they want equality. So what do? Is they turn the beta men against the alpha men, the beta men being the majority of the population. Now, there is a hierarchy among alpha types and beta types when it comes to men. And there's no animosity, no fear, none of these things. It's just accepted, and people, for example, men, will work together to accomplish something, a common goal. But now we have this equality, need for equality, and from that comes this perceived threat. So we have the group of women now who want to take over, for example, and they use the beta men to overthrow the alpha men who have accomplished everything in, for example, civilization. Then what we see happening is this alliance between females and the beta men. The females will turn on the beta men, and from that we start to see a progression, regression in society. This leads to hard times being created by weak people. And now we are here today, and this is the steps that we can observe throughout history. That when we have, for example, those strong physically, mentally, emotionally, taken out of the picture, we start to see social decay. We start to see, for example, decisions being based on mere feelings or perceptions of feelings, and imaginations run wild. We see the romanticization of all sorts of nonsense, and history becomes skewed, even erased. And this is what we've been observing for the past 10-15 years. So I'm expanding on the cycles of civilization and the patterns within, not to be critical of any particular group, for example, beta men or women overall, but more perhaps a reminder as a warning of what not to do again. The alpha men who create civilization and everything else, they're the ones that are best suited to rule, but they're eliminated. Now we have weak people running the show. And in fact, many people, perhaps even you watching, have said that the world is being run by the insane, because it not only stops with, for example, the betas running everything and whatever, but we start to see the lesser and lesser take over because they want equality. The line, once it's moved, it never stops moving. Perhaps it's even erased. And this is the fall of all civilizations. Now I'm just going to segue for a moment here. And it's not to state or imply any preference towards one group of people or talk negatively about another. But what we see, for example, throughout history is we see a group of people exploring, we'll call it, and going to other lands and encountering other peoples there. Now sometimes that first encounter may or may not be pleasant, but what usually ends up happening is the land, the people in the land, will end up benefiting greatly from those who are, for example, exploring. And then there's a mutual trade of, for example, raising standards, infrastructure, for example, of a land, and then things are given in return, and so forth. And sometimes those exploring will leave, sometimes they stay, sometimes it's partly they leave, partly they stay. But regardless, there's a benefit. But what we see now is in a false narrative of history being presented, that these people who are exploring, sharing knowledge, sharing whatever, as the villains. And there's been even many stories in some lands where these people exploring had helped create the infrastructure, and the people of that land end up brutally telling those people to leave. And within a few years, that land, nation, falls apart. That's just something to think about. But how we got to this situation now in the late stage of civilization is because the people who created it brushed aside. And I want to highlight something very important here. War. What do we do in war? We send usually our best alpha males to war. And they end up either being taken from life during conflicts or being severely injured physically and mentally. So what we've done was we've taken out another way of taking out the alphas who help create everything, the strong. We send our strongest. And over time, all we have left for war is we pick the strongest of the weakest, say of the betas. And we keep, as a descriptive, sacrificing our best for nothing, weakening our nations. I just really want to, again, expand on the cycles of civilization and the patterns within and how we got here, because perhaps it's too late now to fix anything of the civilization. And I've asked in videos, what is there worth salvaging? But perhaps when, as a descriptive, this reset is done, it's over, and the time before a new equilibrium is established, perhaps remembering how we got to this late stage can be avoided. Anyway, things to think about. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
The person who can be alone with their thoughts is the person who can think for themselves. And thinking for yourself, that's dangerous as hell. The psychology of the dangerous loner. Now, let's get real about what's actually happening inside the mind of someone who chooses solitude over social validation. First, they've broken free from the approval addiction. While everyone else is posting, liking, commenting, and seeking that dopamine hit from social media, this person has found something more powerful. Self-respect that doesn't depend on external metrics. Second, they've learned to sit with discomfort. Most people can't be alone with their thoughts for 5 minutes without reaching for their phone. Why? Because silence reveals who we really are, and most people don't like what they find.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, when is it going to get easier? When we die.